Welcome to the Big Bass Podcast, the fishing show where size matters. In this episode, we look at the Nebraska record largemouth bass, a record that's nearly 60 years old and that may be ripe for the breaking or possibly even the overturning. I'm Ken Duke.
And I'm Terry Battisti. Our partner, producer, and engineer is Nathan Benson. And today we are going to get into Nebraska's largemouth record. It's one of the 10 oldest in the books in the country. So, Ken, where are we starting off with this?
Oh, Terry, there's a little reference here and there in the 40s to a fish that weighed 7 pounds, 11 ounces, but I can't get any details on that fish. The real first record in Nebraska history for largemouth bass belongs to a 17-year-old high school student named Wentworth Clark. He lived in Omaha, and in April of 1943, Wentworth Clark was throwing like a creek chub pikey in Fremont State Lake number 4, like a state park lake, and he caught a 9-pound, 3-ounce largemouth bass. And there was some controversy at the time about whether or not that was the biggest bass anybody had ever heard of or reported or anything like that. And since the state game and fish offices in the capital had not seen any bigger bass recorded, they said, yeah, well, let's call this a state record.
That's one way of getting it, right?
and you know this, Terry. It's not only is that one way of doing it, that's pretty much the standard way that states do it. That's pretty much the way they get into this record keeping thing. Somebody will catch a big fish, may not be historically big, but it'll be big relative to what other people have heard of at that time, and suddenly that's the state record. Because
you got to start somewhere, right? You got to start somewhere. You got to set a baseline, and Mr. Wentworth Clark. That's he was the one that got to set that baseline.
He set this record in 1943 when he was already 17 years old, just a young kid. But in 43, he's 17. Guess what, Terry? If we
he went to war.
He went to war. But also, this kid was an athlete. He threw a perfect game in fast pitch softball back in 1950. My dad played semi-professional fast pitch softball in the 40s and 50s. My dad was basically a contemporary of Wentworth Clark. And Wentworth Clark, if we had jumped on it and said, hey, let's interview Wentworth Clark for our first episode of the Big Bass Podcast, we almost would have been able to do it because he did not pass away until 2022. At the age of 95. He lived a long life, loved fishing in the outdoors, loved visiting national parks. He was an educator. That was his career. And he was an educator at the high school, college, and even graduate school levels. So this was a guy who really enjoyed the outdoors and did that for a long time. And he's the first Nebraska record largemouth holder. So kudos to you, Wentworth Clark. I'm not going to mock you in your voice just because you've got an interesting name in Wentworth Clark, and he's the first guy on the board.
Yep. I wonder if his tombstone has any reference to being the first Nebraska state record holder.
His
got to find his tombstone.
Yeah, exactly. I'll have to work on that, but his obituary did not mention it. It did mention his love of the outdoors and fishing and visiting national parks and things like that. And he looked like quite a character. He had a lot of big, bushy white hair late in life, and he looked like the kind of guy you'd like to see catch a state record. He looked very nerdy when he was 17 years old and he caught the fish. But I think everybody looked nerdy in the 40s.
Everybody did, without a doubt. Horn-rimmed glasses, all that stuff. So, yeah. Could you imagine being 17 in 1943, though, knowing that you're going to go down to the you're going to go to war? I mean, there's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
You're going to go to war. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I turn up on so many of these record holders, especially from that era, into the 60s, really, and even into the 70s sometimes, is I run into their draft cards. Because, as you know, if you're an American male at the age of 18, you are supposed to sign up for the Selective Service, sign up for the draft back in 1943. And of course, he did that. And he did it on his birthday. So he was a fine American. On his birthday, he went down to the post office or the draft board and he filled out his draft card. So kudos to you, Wentworth Clark, for doing that. I remember doing that when I turned 18 back approximately 1 million years ago when the earth was still cooling.
Yeah, we all did. Yeah.
And Wentworth Clark held the record for a little better than 16 years. So not a bad run for Wentworth.
Yeah, it wasn't broken until 1959, June. And the record went from 9.3 that Wentworth caught to 9 pounds, 14 ounces. And that fish was caught by a gentleman by the name of Bill Latta, Italian, without a doubt. He was from Lincoln, Nebraska, and he caught this fish in a sand pit near Louisville that was also known as Phil Cornish Lake. The fish was 24 and a half inches in length and 17 and a half in girth. And here's the interesting thing is that it was caught on a bucktail lure with a pork frog trailer, which in 59, that was you used a jig and pig is what we would call it today. But there was a lot of pork being fished on a jig back in that day.
Absolutely. And enormously successfully. That was, if you were throwing a jig with a pork trailer, you probably knew what you were doing.
Exactly. Yeah, he caught on a casting rod and reel, 12-pound line. Fish was caught just after 11:15 at night, but he didn't weigh it until about an hour later. And he was almost 60 years old when he caught this record, which is quite a bit older than the average person that catches a state record.
Yeah, it went from Wentworth Clark at 17 to Bill Latta at almost 60. And, there's a whole lot more guys catching state record bass in their teens than there are in their 60s or 70s. And that's a little, maybe not surprising. I think your teens are more likely to be out on the small bodies of water in the farm ponds where a lot of these records fall.
Yeah.
I bet you it's the exact opposite in saltwater, where it's the moneyed people who tend to break the records because they've got the nice boats and can go out. It's probably a ton of guys in your 50s, 60s, and 70s breaking all the saltwater records. But in the world of freshwater, especially if you're talking panfish or bass, a lot of very young guys breaking records.
Well, it also has to do with how many big fish or record class fish are caught out of small ponds. That's the perfect area for, a young kid or a teenager to go fishing, because they're accessible. Don't need a boat in a lot of cases.
Well, Latta caught this fish.
I was just going to say, we have Wentworth that catches it at, 17 years old and lives through 2022. Unfortunately, Latta, it didn't go that way for him. 6 months after he catches his record, he died of a heart attack. So, and he was hunting when that happened.
So there's the first two legit recognized Nebraska largemouth record holders. And Latta's record lasts about a little more than 6 years. And that brings us, believe it or not, Terry, up to the today's record. That's how few held the mark in the state of Nebraska. And the current record holder is Paul Abeglin, and he was from Columbus, Nebraska. And he caught his record bass, which was 10 pounds, 11 ounces, in October of 1965, again, in a sand pit. Now, one of the things I found in digging into this Nebraska stuff is so many of these fish came out of sand pits. If you live in Nebraska and you want to catch a giant bass, get thee to a sand pit now. That's where they are. That's what's turning out these fish. And I'm sure they're pretty small, but that's where these fish are coming from. And in looking at some of the more recent coverage of Nebraska fishing recommendations and tips, people to this day are recommending the sand pits for catching big fish. Now,
well, they don't really have that many big reservoirs in the state of Nebraska.
They don't.
So, yeah, it's all pretty small bodies of water.
Yeah, Beglin was, since he's our record holder, I did the extra deep dive on Paul Beglin. And he was born in Nebraska in 1895. His dad was Swiss, and his mom was German. His father worked in construction. He was a plasterer. I guess that's pretty much gone by the wayside now that we have drywall.
Yeah.
But Beglin was a small man, 5.5 feet tall, 160 pounds, according to his draft card. He was a butcher for much of his working life, and later a bank cashier. In 1920, when he was about 25 years old, he married a woman named Estella. They had a couple of sons. She died young in 1941 at the age of just 42, and he never remarried. He was 69 years old in 1965 when he caught the Nebraska state record largemouth. And then the story gets squirrely. Then the story gets absolutely squirrely, Terry.
All right. Yeah, he caught the record bass in October. He didn't report it to the Nebraska Game Commission until the following February. And there was no reason that was given for, the delay in showing the Game Commission. The only available photo of the fish shows Abiglin seated in an easy chair, smiling and holding the mount in his lap.
Yeah, Abiglin.
So not even alive. Abiglin.
Yeah. I think that's a better pronunciation than I've been giving it.
Yeah.
But Abiglin, yeah, he's just sitting there, hold his mount. He's looking off camera, like almost like he might be looking at another person with a camera. And it's a mounted fish. It's not the real fish. Mm-hmm. If there's another photograph of this fish, I haven't been able to find it.
Well, it's got to be a skin mount, so it is a real fish, but it's not. It's been preserved.
It's stretched across a form. There's some issues with that. I have issues when anybody waits 4 months to report a big fish. Mm-hmm. Now, Mr. Beglin died in 1970 at the age of 74. He lived just a few more years, about 5 more years. He and his wife are buried in Columbus Cemetery in Nebraska. If you want to go by and pay your respects, they're side by side underneath the same headstone. And there have been a few close calls since Abiglin's fish in 1965.
Yes.
In 1988, for example, a guy named Martin Kobold of Wahoo, Nebraska, caught a 10.7, 4 ounces off the state record out of a sand pit lake in Cass County. So he missed it by a 1/4 pound. And then here's the interesting one to me. Couple more interesting ones that came. Well, they theoretically exceeded the state record, but in 1999, a visiting executive chef named Jerry Powers, 65 years old. You got to be old to break a state record
in Nebraska.
Yeah. Anyway, Jerry Powers, 65-year-old executive chef, is fishing Mormon Island State Recreation Area. He's throwing a Rapala floating minnow, and he catches what he says is a 10.14. He borrows some scales to weigh the fish. Weighs 10.14, which of course would be 3 ounces bigger than the state record. Beat a Beglin by 3 ounces. Problem, and he's got a decent picture of the fish, but he's not holding it. Another guy's holding the fish. And again, there might be some pictures of Powers holding his bass, but the pictures I've seen are somebody else holding the bass. And he reported the size of this fish to be 26.5 inches in length. Well, the state game and fish people don't quite buy 26.5. They think the fish is probably 2.5 inches or so shorter than that. I'm not sure what they base it on. They're probably using the fingers or the grip of the person in the photo to give it some scale. And they reject the claim, not just because of that, but also because the bass was not weighed on certified scales. Whoever lent Jerry Powers these scales or let him use these scales where the fish weighed 3 ounces better than that current state record, poof, they're gone. Powers doesn't know how to get hold of them. Nobody does. And so there's no opportunity to test those scales. What a lot of folks may not realize is if you can't weigh your fish on certified scales, if it's simply impossible, go ahead and weigh the fish on whatever you've got. Weigh it on as many other scales as you can, because it is possible under a lot of the state regs and IGFA to have the scales certified after the fish is weighed. Yeah. Yep. So don't give up. But they couldn't. The fish was never weighed on scales that could be certified, so it was pretty dang easy for the state of Nebraska to dismiss Jerry Powers and say, well, nice fish. Thanks for playing.
And rightfully so. Yeah, I mean, it's just the way the cookie crumbles, right? I mean,
was that a reference to his being an executive chef, the cookie?
Exactly. Absolutely.
That's not all. That Powers fish allegedly weighed 1014, which was 3 ounces bigger than the current state record. Another angler comes along in 2011, and he claims a fish bigger yet than that.
11 pounds, 2 ounces from, again, another sand pit. This time near Benkelman. And it might have been a new state record, but Stam weighed it with 2 witnesses present. But he released the fish, so nobody could certify it. So,
yeah, this guy's name was Kalen Stam, and he lived in McCook, Nebraska. And this is clearly a big fish. There are pictures of this fish. But he weighed it with some witnesses. But this is one of those dangers when you want to play catch and release, CPR, catch, photograph, and release, is that you're going to have a tough time, in most cases, meeting the state standards to certify a state record. Unless you can locate a biologist and get that biologist on the spot right away and have a certified scale right there to weigh that fish on, you're probably going to need to kill the fish if you want a new state record. And that's pretty much true across the board.
Yep.
Every state.
Yeah. And that's why, a lot of these states are coming up with, release records, and they'll do the length. You got to take a picture on a certified board, which are easy to find. And you lay it down and boom, you've got a length record. And that's, good enough for some people. But if you're looking to catch a state record and a state record for white, you really need to keep that fish and keep it alive and get the right people involved.
And I'm going to be very blunt and very ugly here. Who cares about length records? Maybe if you're a trout,
I'm with you.
Maybe if you're a trout guy, you care about length records. But no, I don't care about a length record. I want the all tackle weight record. I don't want a line class record. Some of them are impressive, but I do not want a line class record. I do not want a length record. I do not want a catch, photograph, and release record. If I catch a fish that I think is a record, I'm sorry, that fish is going to die.
With a hatchet.
No. I did kill my personal best at 12 years old and chopped its head off with an axe. But that's not something I'm particularly proud of, since that was not a record fish. But if I catch a fish I think's got a shot at a state or a world record, that fish has lived its last day, and probably had a great life, and probably had a lot of opportunity to spawn and procreate and all that good stuff.
Yeah. I mean, you catch why release a 23-pound fish?
Not gonna happen. Why release it and let somebody else go out there and catch it? That's the nightmare.
Well, if they catch it, it might weigh less, because it's probably on its way downhill. Just look at Dottie. Yeah, Dottie grew from 21 to 25-1, if you
19
believe that scale.
25-1. Yeah, 19.
Well,
19,
when it was first caught, it was 16 pounds.
Yeah,
and Before that, it weighed 3 pounds.
Yeah.
You know, and before that, it was a fingerling. You know,
Yes.
but you know, a 25-pound fish, that's huge. You know, and that, in my opinion, can really only happen in those deep, clear, trout-fed lakes. It's what Southern California used to be. You know, to have some sort of a pit in Nebraska, no, I think you ain't going to get a fish that size. But
Well,
yeah,
that's why we have shallow, clear, trout-fed lakes in Florida now.
Now. Yeah, I wonder how that's going to.
It's going to go great. It's going to produce a new world record.
Yeah.
Dr. Battisti, your takeaways on folks. Somebody asked for us to do the deep dive on Nebraska, and just, you know, I think they were concerned about the legitimacy of the fish and all that. And this is kind of a shorter show for us. But Doctor, I want to get your takeaways on this Nebraska fish, a Beglin's fish, 10-11.
It surprises me, honestly, that the record is that small. You know, we just did.
The Nebraska people are shocked that it's so big.
Well, but then, you know, you go a little bit east of that, and you have, you know, places like Illinois that have a much bigger one. You've got places that have bigger, you know, everybody in that latitude seems to have a 12 or a 13. Okay. And that's what kind of surprises me about Nebraska. You know, we just went through Alabama, and, you know, they're catching all these fish out of small ponds, you know, 80 acres or less. You've got these strip mines, or these sand pits is what they call them, I guess. I don't know if they're sand mines that they were mining sand out of for concrete or what, but they've got to be some resemblance of, you know, strip pits throughout the Midwest, I would assume. Maybe I'm completely wrong. I would assume also that it's clear water.
Yeah, you'd think
and
so.
so to me, it's the perfect recipe for creating, you know, fish over 10 pounds, maybe lots of them, but, you know, a good fair number.
They need to be out there in the summertime, or maybe pre-spawn, throwing a musky jitterbug at night.
Maybe. Yeah.
That's what I'd be doing.
Mm-hmm.
If I had access to sand pits. Yeah. But I want to go a different direction.
All right.
I want to go a different direction here. I don't know whether to be shocked that the record is so small or impressed that the record is so big. I don't know. But I'll say this. Having done quite a few of these looks at the state records in our time through the Big Bass podcast, I look at this Nebraska record from 1965 and I say, you know, this might be one of those records that's ripe for a challenge.
Oh, hell yeah.
I realized that, first of all, I want to say that Paula Beglin probably met every standard in 1965. But if he did, it's because there were no standards.
Yeah.
I mean, no standards at all. It took him 4 months to report the catch to the state. 4 months. When they finally saw it, what they saw was a mount. We have no reason to believe that the catch was witnessed. We have no reason to believe that it was measured, because there are no listed measurements of this fish anywhere that was reported contemporaneously or since.
Yeah.
We do not have a photograph of the fish when it was either alive or freshly caught. We have no reason to believe that this fish was verified by a biologist, which would be required today. It is also required today that the fish be preserved in Nebraska and that it be preserved flat so that the biologist can come and certify it as a certain species. And it's like Nebraska has come in after the fact and set up all these hurdles that a would-be record holder has to meet.
Yeah.
Beat Paul Beglin. One of them is your application has to be submitted within 30 days of the catch. not within 120 days, which I'm not sure he even met that number.
Right.
This is one that if I were a Nebraska angler and I caught a legit 10, I'd go after a Beglin. I'd go after him hard and say my fish should be the new state record because I'm being held to a higher standard, and we have no reason to believe he was held to any standard at all. Now, that's not to say that I don't believe a Beglin was an honest, decent man. It's just that I think that the circumstances have changed so much that it deserves a closer examination.
Yeah, I mean, you got a good point, and I agree with, I would say, every bit of it. You know, it's kind of fishy, pun intended, the way that, this fish miraculously became the state record. And I wonder, I mean, I don't know. I think it would be pretty easy for someone that knows the water in Nebraska to break that record now. I really do. I just believe that there's bigger. I believe there's 11s and 12s in Nebraska. And with the rise of the swim bait, I think that someone that's really serious about it. I mean, this would be a great question to ask Milliken. You know, he's from Nebraska, and he's a heck of a swim bait fisherman.
Of course, we're talking about Ben Milliken, the Bassmaster Elite Series pro, and very avid and successful YouTuber, and classic qualifier, Opens winner, super talent. Tied as we record, he is tied for the lead in AOY after two events. Yeah, Ben Milliken, terrifically accomplished angler.
Yeah, and so I think that the right person or the right people, if they put their mind to it, I think that they could beat this. Golly, I mean it's a 60-year-old record.
Almost 60 years old. Well, I'm going to throw this out there to any incredibly wealthy viewers and watchers of the Big Bass Podcast. If you would like to fund us, Terry, Nathan, and myself, to go to Nebraska and to give it our best for the next 6 months or so to break the state record, I'm in. I'm there.
Yep. I'll do it.
I just need somebody to bankroll this effort, and we'll knock it out. I'll bring a couple of heavy action swim bait and musky jitterbug rods. I'll throw some buzz baits. I'll do a lot of fishing at night. I will become basically a nocturnal creature.
Well, you already are.
There's some truth to that too. But I will go almost fully nocturnal, and I will catch some big Nebraska bass.
Nice.
I think that's the best bet to get it done. Go at night. It disguises so many flaws and mistakes that anglers make, and especially solves a lot of the problems created by super clear water.
Yep, without a doubt. If we got any
test line,
if we have any listeners or watchers from Nebraska, please tell us where we're wrong on our assumptions. Because to be honest with you, I drove through Sydney one time just to go to Cabela's, and that's the only time I've been in Nebraska. So I'm a complete illiterate when it comes to the state of NE.
I'm trying to remember if I've ever been. I think I've driven through parts of Nebraska, but I've never really spent any deliberate time there. So another reason to send me so I can learn more about the beautiful state of Nebraska.
Exactly.
I'm ready. I've got the gear.
Yep. Well,
Doctor,
Ken, are we about ready to wrap this up?
Let's do it, man. Let's slam the door on this episode of the Big Bass Podcast. If you enjoyed it, please hit those like and subscribe buttons. It's not that hard. I know you can do it. I have faith in your mechanical skills, hand-eye coordination. If you can do us a big favor, though, just recommend the show to one friend, just one. If you do that, we double our audience, which would be massive for us. That would get us back on a regular and more solid schedule. You can reach us via email at ken@thebigBassPodcast.com, Terry@thebigBassPodcast.com, and Nathan@thebigBassPodcast.com. Please join us again soon. We'll bring you another story about another big bass that you will not find anywhere else. And Dr. Battisti, what are our watchwords?
Size matters.